refer a little bit to my notes here because I want to make sure that I get some of these numbers right. But I just read, Jeff, a systematic literature review that had been published that evaluated the FDA approvals that contained real-world evidence. And the data were from January 2019 through June 2021, so 2.5 years essentially. There were 116 approvals by FDA that incorporated real-world evidence in any form. That was 85% of all approvals during that time frame. And 88 of those, so the strong majority, it was used to demonstrate effectiveness or safety. And 38 of 116 ended up in the labels. Given that, I think there's no question that real-world evidence has landed from the regulatory perspective. But what is on your wish list to attain more widespread utilization of real-world evidence to change decision-making? Is it funding the studies, access to the data, internal operational conflicts? What are we grappling with that's going to really break this through from a customer use standpoint?
It's probably a multitude of things, Patty, but I think the first thing that springs to mind is, again, it's, as you say, it's 85 or 90% of submissions are now including some aspect of RWE. I'm not sure there's, again, any company out there that says we know exactly how to use it. We know what the return on investment of using RWE is. I think more and more organizations are comfortable that there is a place for real world evidence and real world data within the regulatory submission process. That's pretty radical. That's not something that we saw. I think your survey said 2019. I don't think we went much before that as far as seeing real world evidence being used as part of the submission process. But I think more and more as an industry, we need to really quantify the value of that. And if it's as simple as, well, I'm using data to replace a placebo, I'm using a simulated control from real world data, that should be fairly tangible as far as the cost that can be avoided in more of the traditional randomized clinical trial. And I'm not saying that RCTs are going to go away, but there may be great opportunities to expedite product development. And that's certainly behind, what the FDA was all about in the 21st Century Cures Act. Let's try to close the gap between clinical research and clinical decision making, because clinical decision making happens in the real world. So we need better data. We're willing to really look at the provenance of data to make sure that it's up to snuff so that we can feel comfortable about using it in the regulatory process. So more expedient clinical trials, faster processes as far as getting products to approval quicker, those are all very quantifiable. And I think once we start being very clear that there is a financial benefit. Now, the other side of that coin is that, again, I'm not sure I'm fully confident of what the FDA's motivations are, but, drug pricing is a big issue. Well, maybe if we expedite clinical development, we can impact drug pricing. At the same time, again, one of the issues that I've bumped into a lot over the years is that there's an expectation that observational studies, for example, observational studies being appropriate for really being a fly on the wall and understanding what happens in the real world. We can't operationalize these studies the same way as RCTs, because in many ways we're just ruining the experiment we're trying to look at. We can't over-engineer these studies, otherwise we're changing the nature of the real world. So everything's connected to everything else, and there's a lot of nuances along the way. But again, I think it just comes back to education and ensuring that we're being very cognizant of comfort zones and not challenging people too much. We're an industry that doesn't adapt to change very quickly because lives are our lives are mattering here, and so we want to make sure we're taking deliberate steps. And again, that's going to be challenging comfort zones along the way.